There's a moment in every woman's life where she stops begging for clarity and starts creating peace. And that moment, it changes everything. See, he didn't think you'd ever walk. He thought the confusion, the mixed signals, the emotional breadcrumbs were enough to keep you hoping, waiting, shrinking. But one day you woke up and made the most radical, most beautiful decision: you choose yourself. And that is what he didn't see coming. Not the texts you didn't respond to, not the calls you didn't return, not the glow up, not the peace, not the confidence you rebuilt. What he regrets most, Step, is that in the end, you didn't need him to choose you. You choose you. And the life you're building without him, that's the part that keeps him up at night. He thought you'd always be there. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere in the back of his mind, he assumed your loyalty was permanent. The way you gave, the way you forgave, the way you showed up over and over again, even when he didn't make it easy. You were consistent, you were committed, you were patient, and that became something he took for granted. He didn't expect a plot twist. He didn't expect the day would come when you'd stop waiting for his potential and start honoring your worth. That's the moment everything changed. And that's the part he regrets the most. You choosing yourself wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with a big argument or a final, tearful goodbye. It was subtle. It was calm. It was collected. Maybe you didn't even fully realize you were doing it at the time. But gradually, your energy shifted. You stopped chasing. You stopped over-explaining. You stopped bending to make the relationship work on your own. You simply started investing that energy back into yourself. And for someone who was used to you always being available, emotionally, physically, mentally, that shift was jarring. You see, people notice absence differently than they notice presence. While you were there, loving him through confusion, staying through silence, trying through his indifference, he didn't really feel the cost of your presence. It was just there, predictable, assumed. But the moment you pulled back, when you began choosing peace over drama, clarity over chaos, and self-worth over empty promises, that's when the weight of you truly hit him. Not because you suddenly became more valuable, but because he finally realized the value you'd always had. When someone gets used to being the center of your world without having to earn that place, your detachment becomes their reckoning. Not your revenge, your reckoning. He has to sit in the space where your love used to live and realize that it wasn't something he was entitled to. It was something he was lucky to have. And the most painful part for him, he didn't lose you because someone else came along. He lost you because you finally saw yourself clearly. You saw the cycles. You saw the imbalance. You saw how you were showing up with your whole heart for someone who was only giving half of theirs at best. And instead of blaming him, or trying harder, or proving your worth, you simply stepped away. You didn't need closure. You created it. You didn't need permission to let go. You just did. That's the part he regrets. Not just losing you, but realizing you never actually needed him. You chose him. That was the power you held the entire time. And when you stopped choosing him, he was left to confront a version of himself he didn't want to see. A version who couldn't rise to meet your love, who squandered the safe space you created, who mistook your vulnerability for weakness. And now that you've taken your power back, he realizes, too late, that it wasn't your presence that was dependent on him. It was his confidence that was dependent on your love. So now he's left with a regret he can't fix. Because the moment you choose yourself, you broke a pattern. You rewrote your story. You became someone even stronger than the woman he met. And the truth he can't escape is that she, the woman who chose herself, is never coming back for him. When you walked away, he thought it was a move, a tactic. He assumed you were trying to get a reaction from him, to spark some grand gesture, to wake him up. Because that's what people who are used to being chased often think, that your silence is just another part of the game. But the truth is, it wasn't a performance. You didn't leave to make a point. You left because you finally understood one. You reached a quiet, Deeply personal moment where you realized that continuing to hold on was costing you too much. Not in material ways, not in anything visible from the outside, but internally, in your self-esteem, your joy, your energy. You were draining yourself trying to read his mixed signals, to decode his inconsistency, to convince yourself that there was something real in the moments he decided to show up. But real love doesn't leave you in confusion. It doesn't make you question your worth or your place in someone's life. You didn't leave because you wanted him to beg. You left because you wanted to breathe. At first, he didn't believe it. He told himself you were bluffing, that you just needed time, that you'd come back once the dust settled. And maybe in the past you would have. Maybe before you would have sent that text, answered that call, responded to that "miss you" with hope instead of boundaries. But something changed, because this time you didn't walk away from him. You walked toward you. You started showing up differently. You weren't bitter. You weren't angry. You were just done. That kind of peace is disarming to someone who's used to chaos. It unsettles them. He wasn't ready for the version of you who no longer needed validation from him to feel worthy. He wasn't ready for the version of you who wasn't holding your breath, waiting for his emotional availability to magically arrive. He wasn't ready for the version of you who had nothing left to prove. And that's when it hit him. Not because you yelled, not because you slammed a door, but because you stopped reaching. You stopped trying to explain why you deserved more. You stopped trying to make him see your value. And in doing so, you finally saw it yourself. That's when the regret started to seep in. That's when he began to realize how much you were doing. Emotionally, mentally, to hold things together, you were the glue, you were the consistency. And now that you're gone, everything feels unstable. What he misses now isn't just your presence. It's the calm you brought, the patience, the belief in him he didn't know how to receive. He regrets not meeting you where you were. He regrets mistaking your grace for weakness. And he regrets not realizing that when someone stops trying, it's not because they stopped caring. It's because they stopped hoping. But here's the catch: you didn't stop caring. You still wanted it to work. You just stopped doing it alone. You stopped carrying both your heart and his. You stopped compromising with someone who never truly committed. And that decision, the one where you chose peace over potential, reality over fantasy, that's not something you did to him. It's something you did for yourself. That's the part he doesn't know how to respond to. Because there's no argument to win, no point to prove, no fix-it message he can send that moment you finally realized your love was enough. But it wasn't being returned. That's when the game ended, because you weren't playing anymore. You were healing. He was counting on your insecurity. Maybe not maliciously, maybe not with full awareness, but deep down, he assumed you wouldn't walk away. Not because you were weak, but because he believed you didn't fully know your worth. He thought the doubt you carried would keep you tethered to him. The fear that maybe you were asking for too much. The voice in your head that wondered if you were too emotional, too needy, too intense. He relied on those voices doing the heavy lifting for him, so he never had to truly show up. You were giving so much while questioning if you were enough. And in that space of overthinking, overgiving, over-explaining, he was comfortable. Because he didn't have to rise. He didn't have to change. You were doing all the work. And he knew it. Maybe not in a calculated way, but in the way someone knows when they're being pursued more than they're pursuing, when they're being chosen without doing much choosing back. And that created an imbalance that wore you down over time. But here's what he didn't see coming. You stopped betting against yourself. You stopped listening to the voice that said, "If I were different, he'd love me better." And you started listening to the one that whispered, "Wait, what if I'm already enough, and this just isn't it?" That was the moment things shifted. Not on the outside, not in your social media or your texts, but internally, in the most powerful way. You stopped making his behavior a reflection of your worth. You started realizing that his inability to love you deeply had nothing to do with your lovability. And once that clicked, the dynamic changed. You no longer tried to convince him of your value. You embodied it. You didn't chase. You didn't beg. You didn't ask him to see you. You started seeing yourself. You started investing in your peace, your joy, your life outside of him. You took your energy back, and that's when he noticed the shift. Not just in how you treated him, but in how you carried yourself. The silence from you didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom, yours. And that scared him, because now you weren't playing the same role. You weren't the woman waiting for him to get it together. You were the woman walking forward, finally betting on herself. That's when the regret sets in, because he realizes he misread you. He mistook your hesitation for weakness. He thought your vulnerability meant you'd never leave, but your vulnerability was actually strength. It just took you time to realize it. And once you did, you stopped shrinking. You expanded. You grew into someone he could no longer reach with the same tired patterns. And here's the part he really regrets. He now sees what you were offering, and he understands it wasn't just love. It was belief. You believed in who he could be, even when he didn't. And instead of rising to that, he stayed small, hoping your fear would keep you there with him. But you didn't stay small. You stepped into a version of yourself who doesn't need to earn someone's affection, who doesn't audition for love, who knows that mutual effort, clarity, and consistency are not luxuries. They're the bare minimum. So now he's left watching you from a distance, realizing you were never lacking. You were just giving your best to someone who wasn't ready to meet you there. And the person you've become, the one who bets on herself, the one who walks without drama or noise, that's someone he no longer has access to. Because once you start honoring your worth, there's no going back to a version of yourself that begged to be seen. He didn't lose you the day you walked away. That was just the visible moment. The real loss happened long before that. Quietly, gradually, in all the moments you started to outgrow the version of yourself that tolerated less than you deserved. You were changing, even while you were still with him. You were evolving from someone who accepted confusion into someone who craved clarity, from someone who made excuses for his distance into someone who wanted real presence. But he didn't see that shift. Or maybe he saw it and ignored it, thinking it wouldn't matter. You see, it's easy to focus on the breakup, the final text, the end. But that moment was just the result of everything that came before it. The nights you sat there wondering if you were asking for too much when you just wanted honesty. The times you felt alone even while you were in the same room with him. The way you kept shrinking, adjusting, hoping that if you just softened your needs a little more, he'd finally meet you there. That's where the ending really began. You weren't weak for staying as long as you did. You stayed because you cared, because you believed in who he could be, because you held space for him to grow, even while you were growing yourself. But as you did that inner work, something started to shift. You began to realize that love isn't just about holding on. It's also about honoring yourself enough to let go when it stops being mutual. You stopped waiting for him to choose you in the way you'd been choosing him. And slowly, you started choosing you instead. He didn't feel the loss when it was happening. That's the thing about someone who takes your emotional labor for granted. They don't notice how much you are holding until you finally put it down. When you were still explaining your feelings, still fighting for connection, still trying to bridge the gap, he felt safe, in control, like he still had time. But when you started detaching, when your tone changed from hurt to calm, from hopeful to resolved, that's when it began to unravel. That's when the version of he knew started disappearing. And here's what makes the regret cut even deeper. You didn't leave bitter. You didn't leave broken. You left better. You didn't spiral into chaos. You rose into clarity. And that makes it impossible for him to label you as the one who gave up too soon. He knows you tried. He knows how much you gave. And deep down, he knows the real reason you left wasn't because you stopped loving him. It's because you started loving yourself more. That realization stings, because it means the version of you who stayed too long is gone. She's not coming back. He can't reach her with late-night apologies or last-minute confessions. You outgrew her, and by extension, you outgrew the relationship. That's what he really lost. Not just the person you were, but the access he had to you when you didn't fully see your own power. Now he has to live with the truth that the love you offered wasn't dependent. It was intentional. You weren't staying out of fear. You were staying out of faith. And when that faith ran out, so did your willingness to keep compromising. The final goodbye wasn't a sudden move. It was a natural conclusion to a quiet transformation he didn't take seriously until it was too late. So while he may miss you now, what he truly misses is the version of you who accepted less, the one who fought to be chosen. But she's gone, and in her place stands someone who doesn't beg, doesn't wait, and doesn't break herself into pieces for half love. That's his regret, not that you left, but that he never rose to meet the woman you became. When you finally stopped giving so much of yourself, something unexpected happened. Not just for him, but for you too. In that space you created by pulling back, there was silence. At first it felt strange. You were so used to being the one who reached out, the one who checked in, the one who tried to fix the distance before it became a problem. You were the emotional engine that kept things moving. But then one day you didn't. Not out of resentment, not to play a game, but because you realized you were the only one trying. And you were exhausted. That silence, it spoke louder than any argument ever could. And in that silence, he was finally forced to face what had been hidden by all your effort. His own absence. Your emotional consistency had been masking his emotional inconsistency. Your love, your patience, your presence had been covering up just how little he was really showing up. You were filling in all the gaps, smoothing over all the cracks. And when you stopped, everything he'd been avoiding started to surface. It wasn't about punishing him. It wasn't about giving him the cold shoulder. It was about finally stepping back and seeing the relationship for what it was when it wasn't being powered solely by you. And what was left? Distance, confusion, lack. That's what he had to sit with. And more than that, he had to sit with the version of himself he had become. Someone who was okay with taking, but not giving. Someone who enjoyed being wanted, but didn't know how to truly love in return. For the first time, he had to deal with the emptiness you'd been quietly carrying, and the realization of how much you were doing emotionally, day after day, hit him hard, because he wasn't just left alone. He was left with accountability. Your absence didn't just hurt him, it exposed him. It revealed all the ways he'd fallen short, all the ways he leaned on your love without ever matching it. And that's when the regret began. Not just because you were gone, but because he finally saw what you had been offering the entire time. You were the one creating emotional safety. You were the one doing the work to understand, to listen, to be present even when you weren't being met halfway. When you stopped, the emotional imbalance became impossible to ignore. The mask came off. He couldn't blame confusion or circumstances or bad timing anymore. The truth was simply he had someone who was all in, and he didn't value it until it was gone. But the part that hurts the most isn't the loss. It's the awareness that the love you gave wasn't something he could recreate with just anyone. Because what you offered wasn't basic affection, it was emotional depth, stability, intention. And he realizes now that those things don't come around every day. That kind of love is rare. That kind of patience is rare. And he took it for granted, assuming it would always be there waiting for him to get it together. Now, with no distractions, no excuses, no constant comfort from you, he's forced to see himself clearly. And maybe for the first time, he's starting to realize what kind of man he's been, what kind of love he let slip through his fingers, what kind of woman he lost when you chose to stop doing all the emotional heavy lifting. That silence you left him with, that's not emptiness. That's the sound of reality. It's the echo of the relationship as it really was. without you carrying the emotional weight for both of you. And the more he sits with that truth, the more he regrets ever making you feel like your love was too much, when in fact it was the only real thing he had. Closure didn't come from his apology, because it never really does. We often wait for someone to give us the words, the explanation, the admission that they were wrong, hoping it will finally help us move on. But the truth is, the closure we think we need from someone else is almost always something we have to give ourselves. And that's exactly what you did. You stopped waiting for the apology, the clarity, the moment of redemption. You stopped holding your breath for the version of him that might finally understand what he lost. Instead, you started healing without him. And that's the part he never expected. He thought the ending would keep you stuck, that you'd be replaying the past, second-guessing your choices, wondering if walking away was the right decision. He underestimated you. He assumed that because you loved deeply, you'd also grieve endlessly. But what he didn't realize is that while you were hurting, you were also growing. While you were quiet, you were learning. While you were alone, you were rebuilding. Your healing didn't come wrapped in someone else's remorse. It came through your own transformation. At first, maybe you did want the apology. Maybe you wanted to hear him say it out loud. I didn't show up for you. I should have done better. You deserved more. That would have felt validating. But over time, you began to see that even if he did say those words, it wouldn't undo the loneliness you felt in the relationship. It wouldn't unlive the nights you cried, the moments you questioned yourself, the emotional weight you carried by yourself. An apology can't rewrite history. It can't restore the trust or repair the damage unless the behavior has changed. And you knew deep down it hadn't. So instead of waiting for him to grow, you focused on your own evolution. You stopped romanticizing the potential and started honoring the reality. You peeled back the layers of what you thought love was supposed to look like, and you started to see it for what it really is: mutual effort, respect, safety, consistency. And slowly, the version of you that once felt broken started to come back together, not as she was, but as someone stronger, wiser, more grounded. You didn't need his closure because you gave yourself something more powerful: understanding. You understood why it didn't work. You understood what parts of you accepted less because you were scared of losing more. You understood the patterns. You saw where you ignored the red flags. And instead of beating yourself up, you used that knowledge to grow. You used it to rewrite your own story, not as a victim, but as someone who finally knows what she will and will not accept again. That's what he regrets. Not just that you left, but that you didn't collapse when you did. That you didn't come running back the first time he sent her "thinking of you" message. That you didn't wait for him to catch up. He regrets that you moved forward, not just physically, but emotionally. That you stopped needing him to be the one to make peace with the past. You made peace with it on your own, and that makes him realize just how much power you were holding all along. Now, he's left with the memory of someone who didn't just survive the ending. She grew because of it. You didn't get the closure from him, and you didn't need it. Because the real closure wasn't in his apology. It was in your ability to forgive yourself for staying too long, to honor yourself for walking away, and to love yourself enough not to look back. So many people spend their lives waiting to be chosen, waiting to be seen, waiting for someone else to finally realize their worth. But the truth is, the most life-changing moment doesn't come when they choose you. It comes when you choose you. You stopped begging. You stopped breaking yourself down to be loved in half measures. You stopped trying to earn from someone what should been freely given. And in that quiet, powerful decision to walk away, not to get a reaction, not to hurt him, but to finally honor yourself, you didn't just end a relationship. You ended a cycle. You became the version of yourself that doesn't chase clarity. She creates it. That version. That's who he regrets losing. But more importantly, that's who you get to live with every single day. You choose yourself. And that choice, that's not just his regret. It's your freedom,